Abigail Barrett, and From Silence to Harmony, Composing Classrooms of Connection is my magnum opus. I wear a few important hats. I'm a wife, a mom, a musician, and an educator. I actually began my career as a professional singer, dreaming of traveling the world and performing, but life had a different kind of harmony in mind. When I got married and started my family, my focus definitely shifted, and I followed in my mother's footsteps, who was in education. My mother was a longtime teacher, then a principal, then she was a curriculum representative, and now she's writing her own books on trauma-informed instruction. I started in general education, and later I was able to marry my two passions, music and teaching, by earning my certification to teach music. This fusion is what led me to where I am currently. I work with Education Through Music Los Angeles, a nonprofit organization that partners with underserved schools to ensure all students have access to high-quality music education. We currently serve 45 schools, and I am now an instructional supervisor developing a new role as intern and mentor teacher specialist to help recruit teachers to support the pipeline and fill educator gaps, and help our current teachers become highly qualified and confident instructors. It's fulfilling work because it's not just about teaching music, it's about giving every child a voice and access. An underlying concept throughout this course has been that of symphonic thinking. Daniel Pink, in A Whole New Mind, describes it as the ability to recognize patterns, connect ideas, boundaries, and make bold leaps of imagination, like a conductor bringing together different instruments to create harmony. I first felt this idea come to life during work with my critical friend group. Through honest, collaborative conversations, we uncovered shared challenges and unexpected connections across our different roles and our different experiences. That space helped me realize how powerful it is when we bring curiosity and multiple perspectives together. Symphonic thinking is also about seeing the bigger picture, mixing logic, emotion, and imagination to find creative, human-centered solutions. I saw this clearly while using the street data tools. These tools revealed patterns I hadn't noticed, like who was being called on, who was ignored, and how those small moments shaped the students' experiences. Dr. Lori Desautels, her work also deepened this understanding. Her trauma-informed approach in her book, Connections Over Compliance, I'll reference that a bit, reminded me that behavior, engagement, and learning aren't separate. They're all connected, just like parts of a symphony. And finally, when I worked side by side with one of my teachers to implement these tools, I saw symphonic thinking in action yet again. We had to stay open, be creative, and imagine new ways to center student voice. This process wasn't just practical and needed, it was transformative. Symphonic thinking is essential to understanding equity because it forces us to resist the in-the-box thinking or one-size-fits-all solutions. In my experience, students from marginalized and multilingual communities are often silenced, not intentionally, but by systems that don't value their voices. Symphonic thinking invites us to look beyond isolated data points and listen to the relationships within them, among them. It's a mindset perfectly aligned with equity work because true equity requires us to hear every voice, not just the loudest ones. When we engage symphonically, we can hold space for both the data and the emotions, the patterns and the personal stories. We can see that inconsistent opportunities for student voice are not just classroom management issues, they are a reflection of whose identities and cultures are being honored or ignored. Symphonic thinking reminds us that equity is not about fixing students, but transforming the system so that every learner can be seen, heard, and empowered. Equity, then, isn't about uniformity or conformity, it's about harmony. In defining equity and equality, my professional definition of equity has certainly evolved. I used to think it just meant giving everyone the same resources or, evening the playing field, but now I see equity is more intentional. And it is the practice of breaking down those barriers so that every learner can thrive, not just survive. As John Dewey wrote in 1930, education must be a process of continual reconstruction of both self and society. And that reminds me that equity isn't static, it's not a final destination, it's an ongoing act of reflection and redesign. So, equity everyone gets what they need, and equality, giving everyone the same treatment so that they succeed. Equality, by contrast, assumes everyone starts from the same place. It focuses on sameness, on giving everyone the same thing. This is one of my favorite images to depict equality versus equity. And a favorite quote that goes along with it, Lindsay Ott explained equity as not giving every student a size 10 shoe. Equity is giving everyone a pair of shoes that fits. That quote resonated with me throughout this entire course. And as the OECD puts it, true inclusion depends not only on access, but on agency. So where equality builds uniformity, equity builds belonging. And that's the work I'm committed to every day. The topic that I chose, the equity issue I chose to explore, is what I call the equity gap, broken connections and silenced voices in multicultural classrooms. In my role as instructional supervisor, I work across several schools that serve marginalized and multilingual communities. One specific situation stood out to me. A veteran teacher returned after a medical leave only to find it difficult to reconnect with students and staff. During her absence, a long-term sub had built strong classroom culture centered on student voice, agency, and cultural awareness. The shift in classroom dynamics has exposed deeper issues around belonging and engagement and raised critical questions about how teachers are supported in creating inclusive spaces. The issue matters to me not just on a professional level, but also personally. Early in my career, I saw how disconnection between teachers and students, especially in culturally diverse classrooms, can quickly lead to behavior challenges, lost learning time, and low trust. I've also witnessed how quickly students can shut down when their voices aren't heard or valued. Through the street data tools that I used, the goal was to surface what's working and what's not. The goal was to understand how we can rebuild connection and restore voice and create classrooms where every student feels they truly belong. As Dr. Desautels reminds us in Connections Over Compliance, all behavior is a form of communication. If we ignore the emotional and relational needs of our students, we risk becoming part of the very system that silences them. That's why this issue is so important to me and why I believe it's worth diving into with honesty, empathy, and action. Street data, to me, is the human side of data. The stories lived, the experiences, the everyday interactions that help paint the picture of the community and the people living within. It helps us understand what's actually happening in schools. In Street Data, Saphir and Dugan, the authors, explain the real change begins not with test scores or surveys, but by listening to those closest to the margins, especially students in underserved communities. Street data is zooming in and taking a real look, even when it's uncomfortable. It's reimagining the norm and thinking outside the box. One idea that deepened my understanding of equity in street data comes from Collins and the concept of the curb cutting effect. Originally designed for people with disabilities, curb cuts ended up benefiting everyone. Parents with strollers, travelers with luggage, delivery workers. Collins explains that when we design for those with the greatest need, everyone benefits. I see the same thing happening in street data. By elevating the voices of students who are most often unheard we end up improving the system for all learners. The tools I used from Chapter 4 in Street Data were the Equity Participation Frequency Tracker, teacher-student interactions and observations after reflections, and student shadowing. I started with targeted observations to better understand the dynamics between two teachers I support and their students. These classrooms were facing behavior and engagement challenges, and I wanted to see if cultural disconnects or communication patterns were contributing to the issue. I looked for participation, how feedback is delivered, and whether the environment fosters equity and inclusion. My goal was to approach this work neutrally with an intentional anti-racist lens. All behavior is communication, as Dr. Desatel reminds us. And if we listen closely, we can uncover what students are trying to tell us. And that's beyond the words. That exists in what we see and what we observe. Next, I used the targeted observations after reflections. And this was followed by student shadowing, which was really helpful. And it really helped shed light on the importance of connections. This helped the teacher that I was working with see how students felt successful and what made them feel connected. And these conversations and reflections were valuable context to my observations and helped me identify concrete ways to co-create more inclusive learning environments. As both an educational leader and a self-aware adult, I know this work takes humility and ongoing reflection, but it's time to move and reimagine, because that's how real, lasting equity begins. What I've learned on a local level through the street data is using the street data tools and philosophy. I uncovered a central equity issue in my local context, which is the uneven access to student voice and engagement in these contexts, in these culturally and linguistically diverse classrooms. One key insight was that this isn't just an instructional gap, it's a relational and systemic issue. The way teachers connect with students, manage classrooms, and create space for student agency is often shaped by unconscious bias and outdated models of control or compliance. Street data helped me zoom in on the how daily interactions, participation patterns, and teacher language either invite students or pushes them out. A second learning came from observing that many teachers, even with good intentions, were prioritizing the content over connection. And this is a constant struggle for me as I do my observations. This is where the street data philosophy really shifted my lens. Again, Desatel emphasizes relationships must come first. I've heard that time and time again throughout my teaching career, and something that I value and I've always brought to the forefront. If students don't feel safe, seen, and valued, learning takes a backseat. Third, I realized that transformation is possible, but it has to be intentional and collaborative. Through my work, and now working with the initiatives like the Residency Lab and Watts of Power Foundation, who are helping reimagine the educator pipeline to reflect and serve our students more equitably, these partnerships give me hope and momentum for systemic change. Ultimately, the issue isn't just about academics, it's about belonging, access, and ensuring every student knows their voice matters. On a national level, first, national data from the Education Trust shows that students in high poverty, high diversity schools consistently experience less student learning and fewer chances to exercise voice or agency. These patterns are reinforced by standardized curricula and test-driven accountability systems, which often leave zero to little room for relationship-driven or culturally responsive practices, and that includes project-based learning out the window. Second, I learned that rigor is often mistaken for rigidity. According to Learning for Justice, many schools define rigor in ways that prioritize control and compliance over curiosity and engagement. Again, especially in classrooms serving marginalized students. In this model, student voice is too often sacrificed for the sake of order. And third, I saw hope in the Pipeline Remix conference I attended this October. There I connected with national network of educators and organizations actively reimagining the educator pipeline. Groups like the Watts of Power Foundation and are recruiting and supporting Black male educators through residency models, while others are partnering with the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing to create equitable grant-funded pathways into teaching. These insights came through national research, equity reports, the work we've done in our discussions and the critical friend groups, and the conference that I attended. And they affirmed that meaningful systemic change is not only necessary, it's partially already in motion. What became clear is this, that we can't fix inequities and engagement without transforming who is leading our classrooms. When students see teachers who reflect their identities and who honor their voices, they're more likely to feel seen, heard, and empowered to practice. Looking beyond the US, I found several countries are intentionally embedding that student voice. In New Zealand, curriculum, the Te Mataio, I hope I pronounced that correctly, but I probably did not, integrates Maori perspectives and emphasizes relational teaching. This aligns with that focus on relationships, and it's an essential part of learning, not an extra for New Zealand. Second, Finland gives students significant autonomy in their learning, trusting teachers to tailor lessons to local contexts and student interests. When I earned my credential years ago, my cohort was often referring to Finland and often asked, what would Finland do? Because their approach represented a high standard for equitable education. Third, British Columbia, Canada is actively decolonizing its curriculum by including First Nations worldviews, reshaping both content and pedagogy to reflect and respect Indigenous knowledge. I discovered these examples through, again, our course readings, the research that I did for the equity issue topic, conversations I had within our critical friends group, and again, the Pipeline Remix conference, which highlighted these global models of equity in action. All three show that authentic engagement and student voice aren't optional add-ons, they're fundamental. Major takeaways. Stepping back and looking at all of this work across the local, national, and global levels, 3 key insights. Equity is relational before it is instructional. At the local level, using the street data tools, especially shadowing, showed me that that what looks like classroom management issues are actually a connection issue. This aligned with what I saw nationally. Across many U.S. schools, standardized systems continues to prioritize control over connection, and in doing so, silence student voice. This data comes from the Education Trust 2020 and Learning for Justice 2018. Number 2, real change requires emotional courage and proximity. This experience reminded me that equity work is emotional work. And whether it was through feedback conversations or walking in students' shoes during the shadow activity, I learned how vulnerable this process can be, not just for students, but for teachers too. What surprised me most was how quickly a teacher shifted from resistance to reflection after seeing the classroom from her student's perspective. That emotional shift, fueled by proximity, was the true catalyst for change. And third, equity isn't a checklist, it's a mindset. Globally, countries like New Zealand, Finland, and Canada are showing what's possible when voice, identity, and relationships are centered in the system and is part of the design. This confirmed for me that equity must be a way of being, not just a strategy. As Chapter 5 of Street Data reminds us, equity is fundamentally pedagogical. Students must see themselves in the learning space in order to engage meaningfully. Embrace equity. How this will guide my future? Well, these lessons have reshaped how I approach coaching and leadership, and I'll be more intentional about number one, leading with empathy and curiosity. Number two, co creating relational spaces with teachers where emotional safety is prioritized alongside instructional goals. And three, centering student voice and belonging as non negotiables, not just locally, but hopefully on a broader systems change. Equity is not about fixing others, it's about reimagining together. And that's the work I'm committed to carrying forward. Before this course, I cared deeply about equity, but I realize now that my understanding of it was limited. I saw it primarily as a logistical concern: who had access to what resources and how we could distribute them more fairly. Now my understanding has deepened in three ways. Affectively, I've developed more compassion, a more compassionate lens anyway, and this experience has helped me feel the emotional depth of equity. Behaviorally, I've changed how I lead. I no longer enter coaching conversations focused solely on fixing instruction. I prioritize connection not only for my teachers with their students, but for me with my teachers, building that trust and relational context, knowing that without those, true equity isn't possible. Cognitively, I now understand equity as a system of relationships and structures, not just goal, but a mindset and ongoing daily practice. In the most direct terms, equity is the intentional ongoing process of identifying and dismantling barriers so that every learner, not just some, can thrive. Equality offers the same resources to all. Equity responds to different needs and circumstances to ensure fairness and belonging. Returning to symphonic thinking, my equity magnum opus, From Silence to Harmony, Composing Classrooms of Connection. This title reflects both symphonic thinking and my redefined understanding of equity. In music, a signal cuts through noise with clarity and intention, just like student voice must cut through systems of silence. This work isn't about volume, it's about resonance, ensuring every student's experience is felt, valued, and reflected in the learning space. Through symphonic thinking, I've learned that equity is not one instrument playing louder. It's the intentional harmony of many voices, each with its own tone, tempo, and truth. And my role as a leader is to help conduct that symphony. Thank you so much for tuning in.